Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Prashant. I'll be your host and moderator today. I'm part of the supply chain and manufacturing team at Tredence. And I'm quickly jumping on. So today, we'll be talking about smart transportation planning. And joining us are Steve, Ryan, and Shashi. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Please feel free to share your questions. There is a question box on your control panel. Feel free to use that. I'll be bringing up those questions during the presentation, and also we'll spend some more time at the end of the presentation for the questions. Also, this is a recorded version of this webinar would be made available. So now, without further ado, I'll turn over to the speakers, and we'll start with a round of introductions. So, Steve, over to you.
Sure. Thank you. This is Steve Vielmetti. I am currently an independent consultant and also advising several technology companies. My background, I've spent 25 plus years in the supply chain and related functions. I've started my career at Ford Motor Company. I worked in management consulting, consumer products, as well as industrials and automotive companies in the last 20 or so years. I've worked all across the supply chain and supply chain optimization, planning, distribution and logistics. Most recently was with Tenneco Automotive, where I led distribution and logistics for their aftermarket automotive parts business, as well as their ride control business.
Thank you, Steve. Moving on, Ryan, please go ahead.
Hi everyone, Ryan Mascarenhas. I'm with Tenneco Automotive, a leading supplier and manufacturer of automotive components, serving both the auto manufacturers as well as the aftermarket. I'm based in Belgium, so hello from Europe. It's a distinct pleasure for me to be on a panel with these two guys, my left and right. I've known them for a while now. Steve's a former boss and a trusted mentor. So I'm really happy to be here. Over a career that spanned wearing multiple hats, in product development, M&A, consulting, I think I tend to come at these problems a little differently, and I'm excited to share that approach with the panel here. And for you guys listening in, right, think about what we're going to share today as a framework, right? And as you're applying this in your businesses, you can use this framework to assess where the opportunity is, and then think about how you can then use some of the ideas we share here to address that opportunity. So we're excited to share that with you in the upcoming slides. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Shashi, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everyone. I'm Shashi, and I work for Tredence as the lead of the supply chain and manufacturing practice. And I'm joining today from Bangalore, from my kids' room, which has become a makeshift office, and you can kind of make it out, right, with the background images there. So a little bit about me and the company. Tredence is an analytics solutions and services firm. We build custom solutions for various corporate functions. And my team and I specialize in building solutions for supply chain and manufacturing. And that kind of mirrors what I have been doing all my career, 2 decades worth of professional experience, all of it centered around supply chain, manufacturing, and operations. And if I take a step further, the experience has ranged from doing management consulting work for the first half of my career, nearly first half of my career, working in both Europe and Middle East before coming back to India and working as a functional operative for a pretty long stint in e-commerce space in supply chain, and then working on products, building products for supply chain and operations, and eventually starting off the practice, supply chain and manufacturing practice at Tredence. Very glad to be here, very eager to share some perspectives that have probably become a little more important in the last 8 months. And yeah, looking forward to a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashi. So yeah, without wasting much time, I'll directly jump onto the topic. So We know of some of the concerns or the biggest issues that we face in the transportation planning, but as Shashi just mentioned, we understand some of these issues have accentuated in the recent history. Steve, I would like to maybe call upon you and get your thoughts on this. What have you seen?
Sure. So, you know, the icons on the screen are actually pretty fitting. I mean, if we step back, if you're a company spending money on transportation and freight, you know, a lot of activity in the past, you know, macro things, you know, fuel is always a challenge, you know, new regulations, whether it's driver hours or specific, you know, states or countries, you know, requirements for border crossings or other weight restrictions. And, you know, we have an aging workforce, at least in North America, that's driving up, you know, driving availability of drivers, and challenges of getting new availability of drivers. So all of that creates a challenge if you're a leader in transportation, whether it's availability of the trucks just to begin with, but then, you know, the costs are rising. So how, and what are ways to take the costs out without impacting the service levels? And so, you know, all of those challenges, and then now with the pandemic, whether it be, you know, getting onto docks and being concerned about, you know, transmission of COVID-19, or frankly, and we've seen people leaving the workforce because of concerns with the, you know, related to the pandemic. So, you know, the pressures that existed before, you know, and then further coupling a movement toward a lot more at-home shopping has created a challenge where, you know, all of these things coming together make transportation and make the role of a transportation leader more difficult, especially as you're trying to manage cost and service.
Thank you, Steve. Ryan, can we get your thoughts on this?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, guys, adding on to what Steve said, a few things you start to see as trends, as secular trends as well, is the consumers looking at rapid deliveries and agility in the supply chain to meet their demands. We're seeing order sizes start to drop as well. So creating this balance of how do you meet your service levels with your customers, keep your customers happy without significantly impacting your costs in a capacity constrained environment becomes really important. And then you couple that with how the organizations have evolved, where we're looking purely at freight as a metric, right, without thinking about the overall impact. You may tend to over optimize in one area and lose out in other areas. So it's important to take that whole context of your organization, where it fits within the freight delivery or the customer delivery scheme of things, and find a metric, an overall company metric that actually delivers value to your customer. And I think we've somehow lost some of that, some of those ways of thinking by going too far down a siloed organization build. And lastly, you know, what we're seeing is an explosion of technological capability, but really that's led to probably a lot of choice being available and not knowing how to navigate what is the best choice to meet immediate needs, long-term, mid-term needs, and long-term needs.
It makes sense. Thanks, Ryan. Shashi, would you want to add something here?
Yeah, perhaps from a more from a solutions and systems perspective. The learning has always been there that the bigger and more complex an organization is, the more difficult it becomes to choose the right systems approach, right, to address some of these issues. But that problem has become accentuated because in the last year, and more likely that the situation will persist for a while now, there is a significantly less investment available to take the right system or take a complete overhauling systems approach, right? So most companies, and for good reasons, are very cognizant of which solutions they would like to spend on, what is the impact that those solutions can give. They're very mindful of the ROI. And that clearly means that one has to be very cautious before spending the money, because what the solutions may promise may not really eventually work out in practicality. And that auditing mechanism and auditing mindset should be there all the time, before selection, while implementing, as well as in the post-implementation phase. I think that's one clearly acute situation or accentuated situation that we have seen in the last couple of quarters.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you, Shashi. So now that we have discussed about the major concerns, can we now start talking about the solution? And maybe we can, Steve, we can get your thoughts first on this.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if we talk about transportation, if I contrast to manufacturing, you have an ERP, you might have a planning, demand and supply planning tools, even detailed production scheduling, MES, right? We've wrapped a lot of analytics and technology around the shop floor, but that movement from the customer or from the supplier to the customer, one key technology everyone talks about is a TMS, and transportation management system. But if you step back and kind of put the same parallel, is there a planning capability inherent? Is that where people tend to start? No, it's a tendering or a load management, the tactical execution. But when you think about the amount of money being spent on a regular basis, and a truck, let's say a truck costs €1,500 to go from point A to point B, we all know there's inefficiency there, and is the truck full? Did we load it when they expected it to be loaded? Did it get unloaded? Were there unexpected delays along the way that have impacted service or other things? And so as you think about the solutions, a lot of times what I'm talking about ends up becoming a separate exercise or a spreadsheet or a periodic check that people do. But the opportunity to integrate across systems, but also apply new thinking, new technology, whether it be advanced analytics or even AI in some cases. How do you start to unlock opportunity? Because the great thing about transportation is you don't need to invest in new equipment to make it more efficient. The assets are already there. It's not a change in the process per se. I mean, you're still going from point A to point B, but maybe there's a different route to get there, or maybe you can go less frequently and still keep people happy and save money. And it's money that hits your bottom line immediately. And so, this kind of broad set of solutions. I know I maybe answering a bigger question. TMS has really been what people anchor on, and a lot of companies aren't even running a TMS. So you think about the amount of spend, and you think about the broad breadth of opportunity or areas of opportunity improvement as depicted here. It makes the opportunity one that's ripe for new thinking and new ideas.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, would you want to add something here?
Yeah. So I like this. I kind of like this framework, right? It tries to put the problem. It tries to explain the opportunity in the sense of your organizational capabilities and your technological capabilities. And I think what you kind of want to apply, back to Steve's point, the layer you want to apply to this is, once you understand where you are in this spectrum, and there may be other things, but these are perhaps the most important ones. Once you understand where you are in this spectrum, it really helps you understand with an overlay of analytics, what is the opportunity possible and what you can unlock as you're doing this. I don't think there's necessarily going to be a single solution, just like Steve said, in the sense that, if you got the state-of-the-art TMS, it may not be completely sufficient to deliver the value to your customer. You want to connect the dots to customer value and across the value chain, from where the order is placed to delivering that value, learn the insights from there, and use freight and transportation as a mechanism to deliver that value in the most efficient way. So this framework of understanding where you are and using analytics to enable discovering those opportunities, and then tactically using the strength of your organization to achieve that value is important.
Yeah, maybe I'll just expand on that and take it towards how most companies should probably looking at implementing these ideas that Steve and Ryan shared. And I often find, as a consultant and as a service provider, that sometimes a business-first approach gets totally missed out. Right? And what I mean by that is that you can do a dozen things to improve the efficiency of your transportation space, right, and transportation function. You can look at doing a better combination of your loads to improve your truck utilization. You can reduce the miles covered. You can reduce the carbon footprint. But often what gets missed out is what are the most important objectives for which we are trying to implement a solution, right? Sometimes implementing a solution becomes the objective rather than the business objectives that should drive it. And I think there lies a danger that we lose track of the big things and go after mechanisms and procedures and processes that may not end up giving any value to the stakeholders, and that probably creates a repeat frustration in the cycle, and brings down innovation, brings down enhancements, bring down the quality of the processes. I think that is probably a guardrail that I would heavily recommend for most companies and most transportation teams that have the business processes and the objectives very clear before choosing the right solution approach.
Yep. Thanks, Shashi. So
should I probably use that as a segue, Prashant, to come to the topic of today's webinar? And you can probably skip to the slide. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll just let the slide run its course. So what is this? What is this entire list of problems that we're talking about? So let me just take a step back. We are talking about smart transportation solutions. And the starting point is to really understand what do you have currently, whether that's smart enough. And I'm assuming most organizations would have some form of a transportation management system, or they would have some sophistication around their order management modules that can double up as a TMS, right? This is perhaps the case with most companies. And if you don't have that, maybe that's a good point to start with, right? Have a basic solution around order management. Even if you go for the most basic solutions out there in the market, that's clearly a definite improvement. But let's assume that you have TMS in some form or the other, right? What we have seen is that we have had an experience of looking at various TMS solutions in the market, and we have been seeing this over a few years. And I don't want to name a particular TMS, but I would like to abstract the issues or problems that we still find with the ecosystems that have these TMSs, right? Now, those TMSs are great in doing a lot of execution work, in creating audit trails for operations, in managing transporters, in managing the accounting for the transporters. But the moment we talk about the planning layer or the optimization layer, we see cracks start to show up, right? I'll take a couple of examples. I don't think we will have the time to run through all of them. Let me talk about a multi-day order consolidation, right? At the heart of it, it's a very simple thing. Most transportation teams would know that if you have two different shipments that are going to destinations which are nearby, then it makes sense to combine them as long as they can make a better truckload so that you get a better freight rate and you bring down the overall transportation costs, right? And I believe, having seen the TMSs, that most TMSs would be able to give you this benefit. But now let's extend that principle one step further. Just like you combined based on the existing shipments of today, what if you wanted to see what are the likely shipments to come in tomorrow, or what are the likely orders to come in today with a shipment due tomorrow? And with those predictions, you're able to either delay today's shipments to tomorrow or a day later, Or you decide that, hey, it doesn't make sense to delay these shipments. I would rather go ahead and send out this individual shipment today, right? So basically combining the capability to predict the shipments for the coming days and using that to plan the shipments better today. If that's the kind of capability you're looking for, I would assume most TMSs would fail in that. And I'll take probably a one step lower than that. Forget predicting. Even if you want to simulate what has happened in a particular lane and determine the optimal frequency with which you want to send out shipments after consolidation, I would say that most TMSs, we may not be able to address that, and that will probably require a small enhancement to what the planning function from an OMS or a TMS could be. So this is one example. And this, as simplistic as it may sound in theory, maybe we have seen it can drive a very big range of savings, right? And this is much more applicable to an industry where there are more LTL and parcel loads, maybe less for FTL mechanisms and FTL processes. I'll take another example, which I think could be even more interesting, at least theoretically, though practically there will be more challenges. So this is about optimal carrier allocation for each load. Okay, so let me take a small example. Let's assume that you are sending out to two different shipments to two different lanes, lane 1 and lane 2, and if you see how an order management system or a transportation management system would address this problem, there is a typical model called a waterfall model of allocation. And what it would do is it would take the first lane, lane 1. It will look at the costs associated with each carrier. Let's assume the cost associated with carrier A is $100 and the carrier B is $105, right? And you have 5 shipments to send to both these lanes. It would look at the first carrier, carrier A, who is cheaper, $100, allocate 3 shipments to that carrier, hit the capacity max or max capacity of that carrier for that lane, and then having to choose the next best would go to a carrier B, right? Which means 3 shipments at $100, 2 shipments at $105. It has done what it can do the best, and it goes to the second lane. Now let's assume in the second lane, the same carrier A was able to send out the shipments at $100, but you have already exhausted his capacity in the first lane. So you have to go to a second option. And let's assume that second option is $115, right? The model has no option but to choose the second carrier at $115 and serve the shipments of the day. I think by the time I explain this problem, you already know what I'm getting at. The ideal solution would have been not to prioritize first lane over the second lane, but look at the problem at a higher level, not go for local optimization, but at a global optimization level, and prioritize the cheaper carrier, the first carrier A for the second lane, and then go to the first lane. That way, the differential would have been handled and addressed in a much better way. Right? These kind of algorithmic interventions would be required on top of what a TMS can do, and that's what brings us to the heart of what we call the smart transportation planning. It's essentially about creating these enhancements or standalone layers that can improve and impart much better costing situation or a much better service level situation to the transportation teams, right? Yeah. Prashant, can you bring up the next slide? There seems to be a bit of a lag.
Yep, sorry, there is some glitch.
Okay. Yeah, we can see it now. Slide 6 is on. Yeah. As you know, it's just kind of easy to read what the benefits are. Typically, the benefits that we would target through a smart layer of transportation planning would be reduced cost to serve, especially in terms of logistics costs, which means improved cost margins and therefore a higher ROI. At the same time, if you recall what Steve and Ryan said in the beginning, it's not just always about the costs. Many cases, under many situations, the focus would probably shift to achieving better customer service levels, serving the customer ahead of time or on time through better planning. It could be about determining the optimal replenishment frequencies in case of a retail company, right? So the objectives can differ across a spectrum in terms of costs, service levels, or in some cases just purely delivering a better effectiveness and organization around the planning exercise, so that there is less chaos and people know what they're doing on any given day and why they're doing it, right? A fourth and the final aspect of the smart transportation planning suite is to provide visibility, especially in terms of real-time visibility, and enable teams to be able to see what's happening and sometimes take a preemptive action if they see an action causing an undesirable result. So that's how I would like to abstract the benefits and probably go into the heart of what the solution framework is all about. So kind of explained this already. It's about it's about bringing different components and different enhancements together in order to provide most cost-effective deliveries to customers within service level constraints. And one important point that I need to make here is that when we say a solution suite or a solution framework, we are not looking at this as a product that needs to be implemented. We are talking about various enhancements and various capabilities that can be looked at as modules that go and sit well with your existing TMS suite or your existing OMS ecosystem, and either they can be integrated or they can be implemented as a standalone enhancement. In both these cases, it's very important to remember that it's not really an implementation of a product, but mostly an enhancement to what you might already have, right? So how does it really do it? I mean, I think this is the stuff under the hood. The smart transportation planning layer relies mainly on statistical methods and mechanisms or methods of operations research, linear programming, combinatorial optimization, simulation, and queuing being some of them, and also a lot of heuristics and algorithms that may not fit into OR or the disciplines of OR and statistics, but go on a long way in providing these benefits. Can we go to the next one, Prashant? Yeah, so this could be very interesting. This is a sample of the kind of enhancements and capabilities that we have been talking about. Let's talk about freight forecasting. In terms of giving a very small definition of what this is, if you are a transportation team, and especially if you are managing several layers of the network, you'd be very interested to know what kind of freight load am I expecting on my different layers or at my different infrastructure and different facilities on any given day, and what would be the nature of this freight or demand of need of freight, right? Am I going to get a parcel load? Am I going to get an LTL load? Am I going to get an FTL load, and how much? So that's what freight forecasting does. It gives you a prediction so that you can either plan your trucks, you can plan your drivers, you can plan the people at the warehouse much better, right? Order prioritization, probably seen a much heightened importance of this in the 2 quarters that went by. So let me take a step back and explain the context here. If you have enough capacity to serve all your orders on any given day, then you really don't need to think much about prioritization, right? But that's easier said than done. That's very idealistic to say that. Under most circumstances on any given week, you will run into days where your capacity is less than the demand for shipments, right? So what do you do under those circumstances? Yes, you prioritize. And how do you prioritize? Can that be made algorithmic? Can that be made an automated decision rather than having to bring in subjective opinions, right? That's what is the focus of the order prioritization module, to look at the cost to serve, the impact of delayed shipments on each customer and each lane, and then prioritize the orders that one needs to serve today versus the ones that can be delayed. Load consolidation, I think we have spoken quite a bit about it, so I'll probably skip that, allowing you to just absorb the image for a second. Mode selection is an extension to the same concept. This is when you have multiple kinds of loads, especially if you have a multimodal transportation network. Imagine a rail and road. Imagine parcel and NTL and full truck loads on the same day at the same facility. And the traditional business rules that you may have written either as part of your TMS or your OMS may not be able to choose the best mode for a given shipment on a given day, right? So how do you address these situations? How do you write business rules in real time that will help you choose the right mode? And this can, and our experience has been that mode selection is probably the easiest and the least and the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to improving the ROI on your transportation systems. Route optimization, probably the most well-known and a problem that has been there for the longest duration, or has been known to exist for the longest duration. Clearly, this is about determining the most optimal route given several shipments that are going in a particular direction. What should be the starting point? What should be the direction in which the destinations should be covered, and the return load, of course, right? Carrier allocation, we spoke about it in detail. It's about ensuring that we don't do a local optimization when allocating a carrier to a lane, but look at it from a more of a global optimization approach. Capacity planning is straightforward. It's about determining, using my current volumes, determining what is the situation going to look in the quarters to come or years to come, and figure out how much do I need to plan for in terms of trucks and drivers in a fixed rate mode. How much do I need to rely on spot contracts? What should be my dedicated transportation network versus the ones that I take from the 3PLs? It's all about planning for the long term. Asset management is interesting. Tracking and tracing solutions are at the center of it, but going one step further, this is about determining how does your network look on any given day, which are the depots and facilities where your transportation assets are stuck, how much is the time spent under maintenance, which facilities are delaying the maintenance activities more than the others, which carriers are functioning very differently with respect to maintenance activities compared to the others, where are your drivers idling, are drivers taking the route they have been designed for or designated on, or are they deviating for it, right? Giving a real-time view of that and creating alerts in the system so that actions can be taken and not just a post-mortem of these scenarios done. Control tower operations is actually about bringing all this together under one umbrella, talking about various aspects of transportation and other areas of supply chain, giving real-time visibility. And the concept of control tower has changed from providing descriptive analytics on the actions and the processes that have happened in the past to start to give predictions regarding the kind of volumes and operations that would be required in the coming days, and what are the levers of control that a transportation team may have. And finally, probably my favorite, freight audit. Every single transportation team and the supply chain finance team would always do a freight audit. But the interesting thing is, if you have less time to do freight audit, then you go and sample the invoices. And when you sample the invoices, you will tend to see that some transporters would have more issues with their invoices than others. Some lanes would have more issues than others, and a few times or few parts of the year would have more issues than the other. And now if you ask a question, why do these invoices have a problem? You get a variety of answers. It could be just simply that there was a contract agreed on with the transporter, and that contract, the contract was never implemented in day-to-day operations. The rates in the contract were never adhered to. The addresses that an invoice contained were never part of the original routing guide. There could be several such issues, and it becomes almost next to impossible to do a manual audit, especially if you're receiving your invoices in thousands. So how can a system take over, probably do a better audit than a person can make, and do it within no time, and allow the supply chain finance teams connected with transportation not to audit the invoices manually, but take corrective actions in bringing carriers to the right line of operation, making them more disciplined, making them more accountable. That would be the capability of the freight audit module. And this is probably not exhaustive, but these are the modules which are more in use than the others. And I'll probably, at the later stage in this call, talk about a few more enhanced capabilities that are now seeing the need in the market. Can we go on, Prashant? Next one. All right. So this is a prioritization and reorganization of the same modules in terms of the order of impact that they can create. By no means is this a final word on the impact, because as you would know, the impact that each of these enhancements can create depends on various dynamics that may exist in each organization. So by no means is this a final word on it, but just based on our experience over years, we have seen a certain order in which this planning and execution enhancements has added value, right? Starting with mode selection. And control tower operations should never be at the end, theoretically speaking, but for us to have a great control tower operation enhancement built in, a lot of these things will have to be first put in place, right? Otherwise, the control tower lacks its tooth. So that's why this order is as it is. Finally, to talk about how does STPS really fit into your environment, I'll probably summarize what I said in the beginning. If organizations are working without a TMS, or they have a broken TMS, then the first thing that the primary way that one can look at STPS is as a standalone planning solution, right? Execution happens outside the system. Execution happens as it has always been happening through manual interventions, but there is a planning layer coming in the form of STPS, right? If you have an existing legacy TMS, or if you have a TMS, or if you have multiple TMS instances in your network where one TMS doesn't really talk to the other one, then look at the Smart Transportation Planning Suite as the layer of integration or as a layer of enhancement. And finally, if you have the best-in-class transportation solution already, then look at STPS as a way to audit on what your TMS is doing and corroborate whether the TMS is providing all the best benefits that it was supposed to provide, or is there a gap. And that's kind of what is summarized in the slide, in the next slide. This is an abstract of all that we have discussed so far. Let's look at this from a 2x2 perspective. On the y-axis, you see supply chain integration. This is essentially about how various teams within supply chain are integrated with the business, how integrated are the supply chain functions between each other. On the x-axis, you will see the investments that an organization may have done on TMS or other transportation technologies. Clearly, if you're high on both the things, right, supply chain integration being very high and TMS technology being very, very high and latest, then clearly you should not be looking at investing on another enhancement. But perhaps you should probably use the smart transportation planning layers to audit what your current systems are doing and see whether there is a gap. On the opposite side of the spectrum is if the TMS technology is low in terms of maturity and the integration is low as well, then look at STPS as a standalone planning solution that can bring in all these benefits with reasonably less time frame. If you have a high degree of supply chain integration, which means people in transportation and supply chain know what they're doing, have a very strong business understanding, but the TMS or the technology investment is on the lower side, then look for ways to enhance the manual processes through automation. All that you require is a smart decision support tool. You don't really want a sophisticated solution or a big bang solution, because you already have teams that understand the functions very well. And finally, if your technology advancement is high, but the supply chain is not integrated, that's not a good place to be in. That means that you have made the investments, but those investments are not giving a great ROI. At that point of time, you should be looking at integrating using components, and that may not be just building or new enhancements. That may be about integrating various data layers between supply chain functions. It may be about creating the integrating enhancements rather than feature enhancements. So that's my final take on it. But I will also invite at this stage Ryan and Steve, who would be on the other side of the table and knowing how this is really done in practical ways. Ryan?
Yes, I'm happy to start and maybe let Ryan pick up. I mean, one of the things from my perspective in listening and kind of being involved with transportation, a lot of different forms, I think we could probably, many of us agree that most companies may be in the far lowest left of this chart. So no TMS and very limited integration. And so, the starting point, I think I talked about this early on with you, Sashi, that, it's not about finding needle in a haystack. It's about finding, big clumps of hay in a haystack. And part of this is not about, what do I want to do today? To me, it's what do you see in the data and the analytics that tell you what do you want to change from what you've been doing to do every day going forward. So whether it's a consolidation of loads or, I think about Amazon, who backs up to our house quite frequently, and I can make an assertion that although they have so much technology in their business, they clearly haven't figured out last mile optimization. And the waiting for maybe an hour, could they avoid 2 different trucks driving down the road delivering packages from the same DC? And what I see here is ability to kind of see this massive data you mentioned on transportation audit, flipping it around to patterns within the shipments and finding, again, those opportunities that exist that you may not see if you're just looking at today. So, eliminating that carrier from option A if you don't really want to use that capacity in a lane where they don't have the advantage, right? That's where it really gets exciting, to be able to shift or change or fix a problem. On-time delivery, I always have said, you can fix it by getting faster trucks, but there really aren't any faster trucks. So often it's about getting expectations aligned, or if it's a periodic failure, finding and seeing that periodic failure and trying to determine whether there's something else that went wrong that could have been avoided. Or again, is it about setting the right expectations that, yes, this lane will fail 20% of the time. Should we commit to an extra hour or extra day because of that failure, or should we accept it and focus on something else that's maybe a bigger issue?
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, terrific point, Steve. So I just want to build on that a little bit, right? Maybe one with a message of hope. So I think a decade ago, if the 3 of us were sitting on a call and talking about this, we'd need the equivalent of a Ferrari to make something like this work, right? So we should be encouraged that today, with the advancement in and the ease of accessing analytics capabilities, this is actually in the realm of possibility without necessarily making a large investment across the board. It can be scaled up pretty easily. So that's one piece of this. The other piece of this is you think about this framework. Also think about how rapidly do I want to get to that next stage? And secondly, how responsive does my supply chain need to be? It may not be a one size fits all, right? But these are some things that you want to think about as you position yourself in this framework or another, and think about where you want, back to Steve's point, think about where you want to be, not in terms of tomorrow, I just want to solve this problem, but in the mid to long term, how do I want to position my supply chain organization?
Fantastic. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I mean, I can see that you both bring in a perspective from having managed this function versus what we talk about as solution and the systems and solution specialists. And that's always refreshing to hear. Thank you. Yeah, Prashant, I had a question. So maybe this question I'll start with Ryan, just to change the order of sequence. If you were heading this initiative on how to bring in a better, smarter transportation planning layer within your org, what would be the sequence of activities that you would follow? And we have some perspective on the slide, but we would rather hear you speak. Yes.
Right. So yeah, I really like this, right? So this is a really good question, and in terms of thinking about the opportunity. But once so start by first saying, how big is the opportunity? And as you get there, one thing you realize is that it really boils down to a couple of immediate problems. One is, how good is my data that I can reliably make a decent estimate of value? It doesn't have to be 100% perfect, but you'll quickly realize how important it is to have good data integrity to do this. The second is, you want to think about the skills and the fit of the organization in the context of the broader the company that you're in and the industry that you're in. So in a nutshell, right, start by saying, what data needs to be good in order to make a reliable estimate of what the value is to the customer, to the stakeholders. And secondly, what skill sets do I need to have within my company to get there? And a 2B kind of that is, you may not need to have all of this in-house. You can do this with a combination of partners. So what skills would I want my partner to bring along to complement my internal team's skills to do it? And this should start to position you to say, what is the value and how do I get there? And then your next phase of thinking should be back to what I said. How soon do I want to get to that next stage? And then how responsive do I need to be in each of these stages?
Maybe one follow-up question, Ryan, is to this would be, how do you bring this approach, especially if you work with third-party logistics players as well? Does the approach change? Do you find the required level of maturity in the market to bring these kind of enhancements and features, especially when you work with a large number of third-party logistics companies?
Yeah, I think Steve may be a better expert at answering that than I will. So I'll defer to Steve on that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, Sashi, thanks, Ryan. One of the things with transportation in particular, we have so many transactional relationships with our carriers. And I think what, an approach to take and a way to think about is, where's their money to be saved on both sides, right? If there's a carrier, if there's a truck shortage, right? Shipping freight that doesn't allow them to cube effectively costs money. It wastes capacity, right? So, all of those things is a 3PL. If it's a transactional 3PL, they may either not tell you that that's a problem, or you see it in your rate and you don't even know that it's in your rate. So, but once you've identified those opportunities, what I would say, and even back to Ryan's comments on data is absolutely the starting point here, but we can't let it stop us. And, I think Ryan and I had, experience in the past where, well, our master data is not good. Well, fine, let's do an 80-20 and figure out what master data we should go fix. Or if it's 1,000 items going down a lane, we're going to measure 100 a week, and in 10 weeks, we'll have it. Our addresses, I know, again, experience that Ryan and I had together in integrating two companies, and there was this problem that, well, yeah, we ship to the same place, but the addresses are different. Well, let's find them. Let's identify those, and we don't need to wait. If that's going to drive savings or value, that maybe is a project number one that starts to fund the value. And I think even maybe taking it a step further, I would argue that other than maybe the first day of work on something like this, with the right focus, it's self-funding. And maybe not quite, but you don't put in all 8 modules maybe day one. You start with the area where there's an opportunity, where you pilot on the lane where you're spending the most money. And back to what I said at the beginning, if it's a truck that you're paying $1,000 or $2,000 for, 2,000 euros for, and you can cut its frequency by 20%, you start to pay pretty quickly, and that's the gift that keeps on giving. It's, every week you might save that. And that to me is the element that's really important here. It's finding those gaps. Is it a service issue? Great. Let's look at our on-time delivery. Let's visualize it. Let's find those issues and let's correct them. And that's how you build this capability. And it's not a 2-year project, right? I would encourage that you think about it in terms of steps. The scale of the change on the right is bite it off one step at a time, but don't let things stand in your way, like data.
Yeah, that's more than anything else. I see the get it done approach. Steve, what you're saying.
I think it is, but not, unlike standard transportation execution, it's get it done, but I might say it a little differently, is find those opportunities and address them. Mm-hmm. And don't think about it being, again, I said at the beginning, it's not what you do today, it's what you did before that you can learn from, so that you don't do it again in the future, or you take advantage of it in the future.
Right, understood. Prashant, back to you. We have roughly about 6 to 7 minutes. Maybe we can take up a couple of audience questions that may have come up.
Sure, yes, we can do that. So let me start with this one. So the question is, when we talk about smart transportation planning, what kind of savings are we looking at? So Steve, maybe if you want to start on this.
I think the answer there is it depends, right? And it depends. You could save a lot of time, right? If you're constantly dealing with service issues, you could save money, and it may vary. I think part of what this kind of approach would give you is there may be lanes or areas where you could save 20, 30, 40% or even more. There may be other areas where your costs are in line, or you're optimizing your costs, but your service levels aren't high. So what I can tell you is there are bundles of hay in the haystack to go after, and those can be significant. And so, back to self-funding, I think knowing that people are in that lower left corner and finding these buckets of opportunity by using the analytics footprint, you will find opportunity, and it's significant.
Okay. Ryan, maybe if you want to add something here.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, I fully agree with Steve. Right? The savings are effectively a measure of, what are you shipping, right? The mix of what you're shipping, what your maturity is of of transportation, what the maturity of your tools are. You can see a broad range. I think Steve's already covered the range. You can see 5 to 15% on average. In some cases, you may see as much as 30 to 40%, right? I think there are a few elements you want to use to kind of broaden your scope from savings, is to also look at it from what is it that the customer values, right? And that may be your service levels and your ability to ship to them on time, or ship it to them in a way that it's reliable. Another metric for you could be how do you utilize your distribution footprint and being able to more effectively utilize your distribution footprint or your container loads that you're shipping over the ocean. So there are different metrics. You kind of want to broaden your horizons, but yes, the savings aspect is real, right? We've seen this happen even by running some very basic analytics. We've been able to see, like Steve mentioned, bundles of needles in the haystack.
Okay, so let me, I'll put a stick on the ground based on the implementations we may have done in the last 4 to 5 years, both in North America and Europe, right? The answer depends on whether it's which industry you're talking about, whether it's a CPG industry where full truck load is a norm and multi-echelon network is a norm, versus let's say automotive space where the drop locations could be many more than in a CPG environment. And the distances in each layer or each lane could be much larger. And maybe in most scenarios, LTL and parcels are the norm, right? I'm just giving two broad examples, and there will be different industries from chemicals, automotives, and retail, CPG, and so on, right? So apparels, which is a completely different beast in itself. So the dynamics would change. It then changes based on the kind of shipments. It changes based on the footprint. I think Ryan kind of spoke about it, whether it's a spread out footprint or is it a contracted footprint. And my experience from a solution implementation perspective is each of those enhancements we spoke about earlier could easily give you 1% improvement, and when cumulated over so many enhancements, depends on which are the enhancements that you really want to implement. The overall transportation cost reduction could be as low as 5% to as high as 15%. That has been the best I've seen, but glad to hear that Steve and Ryan think it can be even more. That's fantastic. But even at a 10% transportation cost reduction, we're probably talking about $150 to $200 million in some cases, if it's a large company, right? So that's a huge reduction. So even a single percentage reduction could run into several millions. I think that's kind of brings back to Steve's point that this then becomes self-funded ventures. You don't really have to look at investing much ahead of time, right, Steve?
Yeah, and I think that the challenge, and this gets back maybe to silos or other things. People hate to admit that there's opportunities like this, right? And if you're running a function and suddenly you come out and say, oh, I can save 15%, 20%, maybe the first question is, well, how come you didn't do that before? And so I think, and the other side of it is, I think on TMS, there are always these big lofty goals, and I think people get cynical sometimes to say, well, we did that, we didn't really see it. And I think a lot of it has to do with things you've discussed, is not stepping back, not seeing the patterns, not identifying alternatives before you implement something, right? And not seeing the options, seeing the simulation of these different options, and maybe that repeated over time. And maybe that's an experience that we share, Ryan and I, even with you, that when you start to see those patterns, you can address and change the network or change the model to pick up the opportunity. And then again, it's not a one-timer, it's a gift that keeps on giving. And so I think that's the challenge is, often one, getting somebody to recognize the size of the opportunity, be able to find the right way to start and not overwhelm, especially one other side of COVID is you hear a lot of companies not wanting to invest or spend money, right? Transportation right now is the place in my mind where the opportunities exist and the value only gets better. These are great solutions if you can find the right wedge in the right place to start to implement them.
Absolutely. And my alarm just went off, telling me that we're on time, top of the hour. Prashant, do you want to quickly come in?
Yes, thank you. This was very insightful, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you all, and we'll be definitely posting the video of the same, and we hope to see you next time.
Yeah. And sorry for not being able to answer all the questions, but we will take a download from Prashant regarding the questions, and maybe we'll connect with you offline for all the audience. Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Cheers, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.